I ended up in bed with my husband's best friend. It doesn't get any worse than that. My name is Emily. I'm 34 now, and I live alone in a small apartment on the outskirts of Chicago. Sometimes in the evenings, when it gets too quiet, I catch myself replaying the events of 2 years ago over and over in my head. Not because I want to, but because they still won't let me go. I was married. A normal marriage. Without drama, without screaming, without cheating. At least, that's what I thought back then. Michael was reliable, calm, predictable. We met in college, got married 6 years later, bought a house in the suburbs. Work, a mortgage, occasional trips, Friday night dinners. Nothing special, but that's exactly what a life everyone calls successful looks like. Michael had a best friend, Daniel. They had been friends since childhood. Their families knew each other. Their mothers still called each other on holidays. Daniel had been part of our lives for so long that I never even stopped to think about who he was to me. He was just always there, at family dinners, at backyard barbecues, at Christmas, at birthdays. If Michael stayed late at work, Daniel might stop by to check if I was okay. If our car broke down, he was the first to come. He knew our house, knew Michael's habits, knew what kind of coffee I drank and what music I hated. And that, as I understand now, was the beginning of the problem. At some point, I stopped seeing him as my husband's friend. He became something like background noise, a person I didn't have to pretend around, someone I could talk to freely, without filters, without trying to be a good wife. It all started during the time when Michael began working a lot. A new project, overtime, business trips. He was exhausted, I could see it. And I tried not to push, not to complain, not to be that wife who is always unhappy. But loneliness isn't loud. It's quiet. It doesn't make scenes. It just slowly sits down next to you and stays. Daniel started coming over more often. At first for practical reasons. To help, to fix something, to pick something up for Michael. Then, just because. He could come by in the evening, bring food, sit in the kitchen, talk. We talked about everything, work, childhood, stupid fears, how fast life goes by. I didn't notice the moment when the conversations became too personal, when pauses started appearing between sentences, when his gaze lingered a little longer than it should have. I kept telling myself it was normal, that he was almost like a brother, that we were family, that I just lacked communication, and that I wasn't doing anything wrong. That evening was especially ordinary. Michael left on a business trip for 3 days. Daniel came over around 8, said he had brought documents for Michael. We ordered food, had a glass of wine, then another. We were sitting in the kitchen when he suddenly said, "You've been looking unhappy lately." I laughed it off and waved him away. Said he was imagining things. But he didn't back down. He said he'd noticed it for a long time. That Michael had changed. That I had become quieter. That it was like I was disappearing. And instead of closing myself off, I opened up. I said I was tired of being strong, tired of pretending everything was fine, that sometimes it felt like I was living someone else's life. He listened. He didn't interrupt. He didn't give advice. He just listened. And in that moment, it felt like the safest and most right place in the world. When he touched my hand, I didn't pull away. I told myself it was just a gesture of support. When he moved closer, I told myself he was just being caring. When the distance between us disappeared, I stopped telling myself anything at all. It wasn't passion. There was no sudden explosion of emotion. Everything happened slowly, almost routinely, as if we had both known where this was going for a long time and simply stopped resisting. Afterward, there was no relief. There was no feeling of, I wanted this. There was only a strange, sticky sense that something inside me had broken. Daniel stayed silent. So did I. Then he said it shouldn't happen again, that it was a mistake, that we had to forget it. I nodded. I wanted to forget too. But things like that don't get forgotten. The next day, I woke up with the feeling that there was less air in the house. I looked at the walls, the kitchen, the couch, and everything felt jim. Like it wasn't my home anymore. When Michael came back, I hugged him and felt physically sick. Not even from shame, but from realizing that I had betrayed not only him. I had betrayed myself, the version of myself I trusted. I thought I could live with it, that it would stay a secret, that time would smooth everything over. I was wrong. Daniel started texting, at first short messages, then longer ones. He wrote that it was hard for him, that he was thinking about me, that he couldn't just erase it from his mind. I replied rarely, briefly. I tried to set a boundary, but every message pulled me back to that evening, to that kitchen, to that state where I felt seen. And one day I realized that the problem was no longer what had happened. The problem was that it was still happening, even if only in messages, glances, and things left unsaid. And then the thing I feared most happened. Michael started to notice. At first, Michael didn't say anything. He didn't make scenes, didn't ask direct questions. But I started to feel it in the small things. He began glancing at my phone more often, lingering in the kitchen doorway when I was texting someone. He started asking questions that had never interested him before. Who had called? What we talked about? Why Daniel stopped by when Michael wasn't home? I answered calmly. Too calmly. And that, as I understand now, gave me away more than anything else. Daniel, on the other hand, began acting as if nothing had happened. He went back to being the family friend, joking, laughing, clapping Michael on the shoulder, talking about sports and work. And every time I saw them together, everything inside me tightened. I looked at them and thought that Michael had no idea how close to him stood the man who had destroyed his life. And I myself stood there, smiling. Sometimes Daniel's and my eyes met, just for a second. But in that second, there was too much. Guilt, fear, tension, and something else that made it feel even worse. I tried to cut off contact. I stopped replying to messages, stopped being alone with him. I thought that if I just waited it out, everything would disappear on its own. But one evening, Daniel showed up without warning. Michael wasn't home. He stood in the doorway, confused, nervous, nothing like the confident man everyone knew. He said he needed to talk, that he couldn't go on like this, that it was tearing him apart inside. I should have closed the door. I didn't. We sat in the living room, at a distance, but the tension was so thick it felt like you could touch it. He said he had made a mistake, but couldn't pretend he felt nothing. He said I had become something more to him than just his friend's wife, that he hated himself for it, and that he hated me for the fact that he couldn't stop thinking about me. I listened and understood that this was no longer just an affair. This was a trap, and I was in it by my own choice. I told him it was over, that we would destroy too many lives, that Michael didn't deserve this, that I didn't want to be that kind of person. He was silent, and then he said one sentence that still echoes in my head. He said, "Are you sure you haven't already destroyed everything?" A few days later, Michael asked me directly. He didn't yell. He just looked me in the eyes and said that he felt like there was something between me and Daniel that he didn't know about, that he couldn't explain it logically, but his intuition wouldn't let it go. In that moment, I understood. Either I would lie one more time, or I would tell the truth and destroy everything completely. I lied. I said he was imagining things, that Daniel was just looking out for us, that he was paranoid from exhaustion. I spoke confidently, almost convincingly, and Michael believed me, or pretended to believe me. I still don't know. After that, everything got even worse. Michael grew colder, polite but distant. He started staying late at work, not because he had to, but because, as I now understand, he didn't want to come home. And Daniel started to unravel. He sent me long messages at night. He accused me of using him. Then he apologized. Then he accused me again. He said that if I didn't tell Michael the truth, he would do it himself. Then he wrote that he couldn't bring himself to cause Michael that much pain. Then he threatened again. I lived in constant tension. I was afraid of every notification, every call, every visit. And one day, it all exploded. We were all together at a family dinner. Michael's parents, his sister, the kids. An ordinary evening. Laughter, food, conversation. Daniel was sitting across from me. Michael was beside me. I noticed that Daniel was barely eating. He looked at his plate, then at Michael, then at me. And suddenly, he stood up. He said he had to say something important. Everyone went quiet. I felt my hands go numb. He started saying that he had been carrying guilt inside for a long time, that he had betrayed the person closest to him, that he could no longer live with it. At first, Michael didn't understand. He even smiled. He thought it was a joke. And then Daniel told the truth. He said that something had happened between us, that it happened when Michael wasn't there, that it was a mistake, that he hated himself, and that Michael deserved to know. I don't remember what happened over the next few minutes. I remember shouting. I remember Michael standing up. I remember him hitting Daniel. I remember someone crying. I remember someone taking the kids away. And then, silence. Michael didn't say a single word to me. He just looked at me as if a complete stranger were standing in front of him. And in that look was everything. Pain, disappointment, rage, emptiness. That night, he left. He didn't take his things. He didn't say whether he would come back. And I stayed in a house that suddenly felt too big and too empty. The house was no longer a home. It became a place where every object reminded me of what I had destroyed. I couldn't sleep in our bedroom. Everything there smelled like Michael. His pillow, his side of the bed, his habit of leaving a book on the nightstand. I slept on the couch, but it wasn't any easier there. The silence pressed harder than any scream. Michael didn't reply to my messages. He didn't answer my calls. I wrote long texts, then short ones, then just, please. Sometimes I deleted everything and started over. Sometimes I just sat with my phone in my hands, unable to send anything. 2 days later, he came back. Only to take his things. He was calm. Too calm. He didn't look at me. He spoke in short sentences. Asked where the suitcases were. I tried to explain something, but he raised his hand and asked me to stop. He said that if I kept talking, he would say something he would regret later. That was worse than yelling. He went to stay with his sister. A week later, I received a letter from a lawyer. The divorce went quickly. Without scandals, without fighting over anything. Michael didn't want anything. Not the house, not the car, not the money. He just wanted to get out of this life as fast as possible. And I had no right to stop him. Daniel disappeared. He stopped writing, stopped calling. Mutual acquaintances said he moved to another state. Some said he had problems with alcohol. Others said he lost his job. I didn't ask. I was afraid to know. Sometimes I had dreams where everything was different. Where that evening in the kitchen never happened. Where I simply closed the door. Where Michael and I were still laughing at stupid TV shows and planning a vacation. I woke up with the feeling that something had been ripped out of my chest again. The hardest part was explaining things to other people. Not the truth. I told almost no one the truth. But the official version. People like simple reasons. We drifted apart. We weren't compatible. We got tired. But every time I said it, it felt like I was lying again and again, not only to Michael, but to the entire world. I lost friends, not all at once. Gradually. Some stopped calling, some became cold, some chose Michael's side. I didn't blame them. I would have done the same. Sometimes I caught myself feeling angry at Daniel, not for telling the truth, but for not stopping sooner. And then I understood. He was only part of the mistake. The other part was me. A year passed, then another. I changed my home, my job, my city. I learned how to live alone. I learned how to be strong. But it was no longer the kind of strength I used to be proud of. It was the strength of survival. Sometimes it seems to me that the scariest thing isn't losing a marriage. It's losing trust in yourself. I'm no longer sure about my decisions, about my feelings, about my justifications. I know how easy it is to convince yourself that nothing bad is happening. How easy it is to cross a line without even noticing it. If I could go back, I wouldn't look for attention in someone else's hands. I wouldn't confuse loneliness with closeness. And I wouldn't think that one mistake is just a mistake. Because sometimes one mistake changes your entire life. I'm not asking for forgiveness. I'm not looking for excuses. I'm just living with the consequences.